Dr. Aaron Solis never wanted to return to Mars. Yet here he was, stepping off the rickety shuttle like some unwilling tourist. As he surveyed the sprawling red wasteland that was the Martian quarantine zone, he couldn't help but think, Mars, where all dreams go to die, now with added alien menace. The whole place was waiting to implode, or explode, whatever fit the Martian mood swings best. The airlock hissed open, and the tangy scent of synthetic oxygen assaulted his senses. Welcome back to the armpit of the solar system, he muttered to himself. Everything was red or rusty, or both. It was like living inside a very pissed-off tomato. As Aaron made his way down the cramped corridor, he was met by a welcoming committee of two. Jenkins, a technician with all the charisma of a wet sock, and Dr. Alara Voss, the area's resident cynic and his only potential ally. She looked at him from under eyebrows that might as well have been weapons grade. So, decided you missed our delightful company, huh? Alara's voice was like sandpaper on a chalkboard, and somehow he found it comforting. Yeah, I just couldn't resist the charm of potential alien annihilation. Keeps life interesting. He flashed a crooked grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Jenkins grunted, a sound that might have been a laugh or perhaps a digestive issue. We've been holding the fort, barely. Damn thing keeps sending these waves, like it's got a thing for psychological warfare. You mean it's not just trying to drive us insane? Aaron shot back, his mind already calculating the potential implications. A sentient entity, rumored to be weaponized by the Zarian Empire. Or, as the paranoid would call them, those tentacled bastards. Alara rolled her eyes, a gesture that suggested she might have been a trained athlete in a previous life. Listen, Aaron, whatever this thing is, it's getting worse. People are on edge. I've seen less stress at a tax audit. Are you sure it's the entity and not because Jenkins hasn't showered in a week? Aaron quipped, earning a rare chuckle from Alara and a scowl from Jenkins. They walked past a series of sterile rooms that were anything but inviting. The walls were an uninspired grey, the kind of color that screamed for a splash of blood or a horrific accident just to make life interesting. So, what's the plan? Or is this a classic case of winging it? Aaron asked as they entered the control room. Alara sighed, an artful sound that conveyed a year's worth of frustration. The plan is to not die, preferably. The entity's empathic waves are screwing with everyone's head. We need to figure out how to block it before it turns us all into babbling idiots, or worse, makes us sing karaoke. No one deserves that fate, Aaron agreed, glancing at the screens displaying a series of erratic patterns. The entity was out there, somewhere in the dusty expanse, playing mind games like a cosmic prankster. We've tried everything short of asking it nicely, Jenkins added, rubbing his temples. But all we've got are headaches and vivid nightmares. The kind where you're naked in public, but worse. Maybe it just wants friends, Aaron suggested. Of course, its definition of friendship might involve vivisection. Alara smirked, but her eyes were shadowed with worry. You might be onto something. We need to understand it before it understands us in a way that involves dismemberment. Aaron, you think you can handle that? Jenkins asked, skepticism oozing from his voice like a particularly unpleasant bodily fluid. Figure out what it wants before it decides to rearrange our neural pathways for fun. Sure, why not? I've got nothing better to do, except maybe a lobotomy. Aaron's smile was as dry as the Martian soil. They all pretended for a moment that they weren't terrified. It was a comfortable lie, like a well-worn pair of shoes that never really fit right. The kind of lie that made living in a tin can on a hostile planet just a tad more bearable. Where do we start? Aaron asked, squinting at the data scrolling across the screen. Alara leaned over, her tone dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We start by not losing our minds. We'll check the latest wave patterns, see if there's any rhythm to this madness. And if we find one? Aaron asked, we pray it's not a death march. Hours passed in their cramped quarters, the tension as thick as the Martian dust storms that occasionally battered the colony. Aaron sifted through the data, trying to make sense of patterns that seemed almost playful in their intent. Look at this, he said, pointing to a particularly erratic spike. Looks like my last attempt at baking, Jenkins commented, squinting at the screen. You're not far off, Aaron replied. It's like it's testing us. Poking and prodding to see how we'll react. You mean like a kid with a new ant farm? Alara quipped. Or a sociopath with a magnifying glass, Aaron corrected. It's intelligent. It has to be. This isn't random. And yet here we are, sitting ducks in the universe's worst shooting gallery, Alara said, rubbing her eyes. There was a silence, the kind that only comes when everyone in a room suddenly realizes they're out of their depth. And then, as if the universe wasn't done toying with him, the lights flickered. A low hum vibrated through the floor. What now? Jenkins groaned, looking around like he expected the walls to cave in any second. Aaron's stomach dropped. I think our friend is saying hello. The hum grew louder, morphing into a visceral pulse that reverberated through their bones. It was as if the entity was tuning a cosmic radio, and they were the unlucky recipients of its broadcast. "This can't be good," Alara muttered, her voice laced with a dread that Aaron felt in his own bones. Screens flickered, displaying random images and snippets of sound, jumbled noises that were halfway between a garbled distress signal and a child laughing. It was unnerving in the way only pure, unadulterated madness could be. "Well, at least it hasn't killed us yet," Jenkins said, trying to sound optimistic but failing spectacularly. "Or maybe it's just biding its time," Aaron replied, eyes narrowed as he tried to decipher the chaos on the screens. Alara leaned in closer, pointing at a sequence that seemed oddly familiar. "Wait, isn't that Morse code?" she asked, disbelief coloring her voice. Aaron squinted, translating the archaic dots and dashes in his head. "Damn, you're right, it says, hello, really?" He looked up, half expecting the universe's biggest, gotcha, moment. "It's saying hello?" Jenkins asked, incredulous. "What next? It wants to borrow a cup of sugar. Or our brains," Aaron said, unable to suppress a shiver. Alara sat back, her expression a mix of awe and terror. "So it's definitely communicating. Now what?" "Now," Aaron replied, "we figure out how to say hello back without inviting it to tea. Or dissection." The room fell silent again, each of them wrestling with thoughts of an alien intelligence that was, at best, curious, and at worst, homicidal. "You know," Aaron finally said, breaking the tension, "I was really hoping for a quiet retirement full of books and bad coffee." "Yeah, well," Alara responded, "welcome back to Mars. Where retirement plans go to die." They all chuckled, the sound hollow and full of fear. But it was enough to break the tension, if only for a moment. As Aaron turned back to the screens, he felt a strange sense of determination. The odds were stacked against them, the threat of the unknown loomed large, and sanity was a fleeting dream. But for the first time since landing, he felt a flicker of hope. "Let's see what our Martian friend really wants," he said, "before it decides our brains are better used as jam." "And if it does?" Jenkins asked, his voice tinged with nervous laughter. "Well," Aaron replied, "at least we'll get to say we were part of the universe's worst dinner party." With that, they dove back into the work, their futures uncertain, their chances slim. But as Aaron glanced at Alara and Jenkins, he realized they were all in this together, come hell or high Martian water. And really, what more could you ask for in a universe this messed up? Aaron Solis squinted at the screen until the blurry dots and dashes molded into something resembling coherence. "We're not alone in the universe, and it's just our luck they're sending us a wish you were here postcard in Morse code. We need more than postal skills, Aaron," Alara said, her voice tinged with exhaustion and a dash of sarcasm. "We need someone who can talk to these things before they decide to turn us into Martian pate." "That's where Jax comes in," Aaron replied, glancing over at Jax Thorne, who was busy tinkering with a series of wires that looked like the innards of a toaster, if toasters were designed by the clinically insane. Jax was the kind of engineer who could make a spaceship out of a roll of duct tape and sheer spite. "Jax, think you can rig up something that lets us talk back to our new pen pal? Preferably without frying us in the process?" Aaron asked. Jax looked up, his eyes sparkling with the kind of mischief that only came with a complete disregard for personal safety. "No promises on the not frying part, but I'll see what I can do. Might need to sacrifice a coffee maker to the gods of improvisation, though." "Sacrifice whatever you need. Coffee can be replaced, our sanity can't," Alara muttered, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely sure about that last part. "Leela's your go-to for this kind of weirdness," Jax continued, redirecting his gaze toward the xenolinguist hunched at a nearby terminal. Leela Nix, a skeptic through and through, embodied the kind of pragmatic disbelief usually reserved for used spaceship salesmen. "Leela, thoughts?" Aaron asked, hoping she'd have some insight into the empathic mumbo-jumbo that was turning their brains into scrambled eggs. Leela didn't look up from her screen, which was filled with colorful graphs that might as well have been modern art for all Aaron could decipher. "Empathic waves aren't my specialty, but my guess. The Zarians are behind the chaos. They're using this entity like a kid with a shiny new remote control." "Well, they've certainly hit the screw with humans button enough times," Aaron remarked, his words heavy with sarcasm. "Exactly. The waves are so powerful, they're overwhelming our basic emotional responses. Half the colony is either on the verge of a nervous breakdown or convinced they're the next messiah," Leela said, finally looking up. "Great, so we're basically living in the universe's worst soap opera," Aaron sighed, rubbing his temples. "Can't we just, I don't know, ask it to tone it down a bit?" Jax asked, his voice teasing as he twisted another wire into place. Leela gave him a withering look. "Sure, just let me send it a Pretty please, text. This isn't a bad internet connection, it's an ancient entity being used as a weapon. So, it's like trying to reason with a toddler armed with a nuclear bomb. Aaron ventured, not entirely joking. Pretty much. We need to find a way to communicate without triggering World War III, Leela confirmed, tapping her chin thoughtfully. Well, I always did love a good challenge. Aaron stood up, stretching his arms overhead with a yawn that echoed their collective exhaustion. Let's dig into this mess and see what we can do before we all end up in straitjackets. With that, they descended into a flurry of activity, each taking up their respective roles in unraveling the Martian enigma. The room buzzed with the kind of chaotic energy that only came from a group of humans staring down their impending doom with a mix of defiance and gallows humor. Jax had a knack for makeshift inventions that bordered on miraculous. Within the hour, he'd constructed a contraption that looked suspiciously like it might explode on contact. All right, I've cobbled together an interface that should let us send a controlled signal back. Probably, maybe. Probably and maybe are comforting words, Aaron commented dryly. In the same way that, we've run out of air, is comforting. Jax just grinned, the expression more manic than reassuring. Hey, it's better than, oops, that's not supposed to happen. Fair point, Aaron conceded. Leela, think you can craft a message that doesn't scream, come eat us, we're delicious. Leela smirked, her fingers flying over her tablet. I'll try my best. How about we start with something simple? Hello, please don't kill us seems appropriate. Sounds about right, Alara agreed, her voice laced with the kind of dry humor that matched the Martian landscape. As Leela worked on composing the message, Aaron found himself staring at the screens again, the erratic wave patterns blinking back at him like cosmic Morse code. The entity was intelligent, that much was clear, but its motives were as obscure as the dark side of Pluto. Okay, I've got something, Leela said, breaking Aaron's reverie. It's a basic greeting, with an emphasis on non-hostility. Here goes nothing. Jax adjusted a few knobs, his lips pursed in concentration. Sending, now. The room held its collective breath as the interface whirred to life, the message shooting out into the Martian abyss like a Hail Mary pass with no idea where it might land. They waited, the silence stretching thin as they listened for any sign of a response. And then it came, a low hum that built into a resonant chord, vibrating through their bones with an intensity that was almost musical. The screens flickered, and new patterns emerged, slower, more deliberate than before. I think it's working, Aaron said, a hint of disbelief coloring his voice. We actually got through. Well, I'll be damned, Jax said, his grin wide enough to split his face in two. Maybe we won't be turned into Martian kebabs after all. Leela studied the patterns with a furrowed brow. It seems curious, almost like it's contemplating our message. Contemplating whether to hug us or squash us, more like, Alara added with a knowing nod. Aaron let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. This is good. We've opened a line of communication. Now we just have to keep it open without inviting disaster. Easier said than done, Leela commented, her fingers twitching with nervous energy. But not impossible, Aaron replied, a determined glint in his eye. Let's see if we can learn what the Zarians are really up to. With each passing hour, they pieced together the puzzle, the entity's responses becoming more structured, almost conversational in their complexity. It was like talking to an ancient oracle that had been rudely awoken from its nap, and wasn't entirely sure if it wanted to help or slap them silly. The data pointed to a single, unsettling conclusion. The Zarians weren't just using the entity to sow chaos. They were amplifying its empathic abilities to destabilize human colonies across the solar system, exploiting the chaotic emotions to weaken defenses and open the path for invasion. So, we're babysitting a bomb that could go off at any moment. Fantastic, Jax said, summing up their predicament with a succinctness Aaron could only admire. The Zarians have always been opportunistic bastards, Alara said, her voice a mix of anger and resignation. We just never thought they'd stoop this low. Underestimate a Zarian, and you'll find yourself in a ditch without even realizing you've been pushed, Aaron muttered, his mind racing with the implications. Yeah, well, we've got the upper hand, Jax said, his confidence a welcome counter to the gloom. We've made contact, we've got brains, and we've got the element of surprise. Leela nodded, determination hardening her features. We need to figure out how to cut the Zarians out of the equation. If we can block their influence, we might have a chance to stabilize the entity. And how do you propose we do that? Aaron asked, though he couldn't deny the flicker of hope in his chest. By understanding the entity's true nature, Leela replied. It's sentient, and sentience means it has desires, fears, and, hopefully, a sense of self-preservation. Let's hope it's more afraid of the Zarians than it is of us, Aaron mused, rubbing his hands together as if warming them by a non-existent fire. "We've got our work cut out for us," Alara said, casting a sweeping glance around the room. "But at least we've got each other. And hey, it's not like we've got anything better to do." Aaron chuckled, the sound a brittle echo of the tension that loomed like a storm cloud over their heads. "No, indeed. Let's take a page from the entity's book, keep poking and prodding until we find a way to fight back." They worked late into the Martian night, a ragtag group of stubborn misfits bound by a single, unyielding desire to survive the nightmare they'd been thrust into. As the hours turned into days, the entity's responses grew more coherent, its pattern shifting from chaotic discord to something approaching harmony. "Looks like it's starting to trust us," Jack said, stifling a yawn as he tapped a series of commands into the interface. "Trust is good," Aaron replied, "but we need more than that. We need an ally. And allies are hard to come by in this universe," Leela noted, her tone sardonic but hopeful. The air was thick with unspoken fears, but in that tiny room on an unforgiving planet, hope burned brighter than the sun. They were up against impossible odds, but for the first time, Aaron felt that maybe, just maybe, they might come out on top. "Let's see what we can do, folks. For better or worse, we're in this together," Aaron said, his voice a rallying cry in the darkness. With renewed vigor, they dug in, determined to wrest their fate from the hands of capricious aliens and forge their own path. Mars might have been a place where dreams went to die, but they weren't ready to give up just yet. Not while there was still a chance to turn the tide. And as far as Aaron was concerned, that was enough. Dr. Aaron Solus wasn't sure what was worse: the growing threat of intergalactic annihilation or enduring the increasing empathic surges that made his head feel like it was hosting a rock concert from hell. Either way, it was enough to make him question his life choices. He rubbed his temples, swearing under his breath, as the latest wave hit him with the subtlety of a runaway cargo freighter. "Anyone else feel like their brain's been put through a blender?" Aaron asked, his voice a half groan, half lament. Jax, fiddling with a gadget that looked like it belonged in a junkyard more than a lab, didn't even look up. "You mean that isn't just my charming personality?" "Charming like a black hole," Leela muttered, her eyes glued to her tablet. She was supposed to be deciphering the latest patterns from the entity, but her concentration was shot to pieces by the psychic equivalent of a drunken bar brawl. Aaron shot her a sympathetic look. "We're in deep, and it's getting deeper." "No kidding," Alara chimed in, her tone drenched in fatigue. "The Zarians are playing us like a damn fiddle, and the entity's a maestro." And with a hapless audience forced to watch the show, Aaron added, unable to resist the bleak humor. "Speaking of shows no one wants to see," Jack said, holding up a contraption that looked like it might explode if you breathed on it wrong, "I've got something that might help." "Might?" Aaron eyed the device, a tangle of wires and blinking lights that seemed to defy basic safety standards. "That thing have a name, or should we just call it the Equalizer?" "Let's go with the brain buffer," Jack said, giving it a shake that didn't inspire confidence. "It's supposed to shield us from the worst of the empathic waves. Or, fry us instantly." "Reassuring," Leela deadpanned. "And how long does this shield last?" "Hard to say. Could be an hour, could be 5 minutes. Think of it like a really unpredictable umbrella in a shit storm." "Well, I've always wanted to live dangerously," Aaron said, sarcasm masking the tight coil of anxiety in his gut. "Let's give it a whirl." They gathered around Jax's latest Frankenstein's monster, each donning a headset that looked suspiciously like it had been pieced together from old toaster parts. As Jax powered it up, Aaron felt a strange, slightly nauseating hum settle over his mind. It was like someone had thrown a damp blanket over the chaotic waves lashing at their sanity. "Feels different," Aaron admitted, the constant throbbing in his skull subsiding to a dull roar. "Different good or different bad?" Alara asked, skepticism etched across her face. "Different, not actively dying," Aaron replied with a shrug. Jax grinned, a touch of manic pride in his eyes. "Well, it's not perfect, but it should keep us from totally losing it while we figure out the Zarians' next move." "Speaking of which," Leela said, looking up from her display, "I've been piecing together the entity's responses. It's clear now, the Zarians want us to implode. They're using the empathic waves to turn us against ourselves." "Bloody brilliant," Aaron muttered. "They don't even need to fire a shot. Just sit back and let us do their dirty work." "Depressingly efficient," Alara agreed. "We're our own worst enemies, and the Zarians know it. Nothing quite like a little existential dread to get the adrenaline pumping," Jax added, tweaking a dial on his contraption with a deftness that belied its ramshackle appearance. Aaron cast a wary glance at the screens, where the entity's patterns continued to shift and dance. There was a new rhythm now, a complexity that suggested a consciousness grappling with its own existence. It was trying to communicate something deeper, but its message was muddled by the Zarians' interference. We need to get through to it, Aaron said, determination hardening his resolve. If we can show the entity that we're not the enemy, we might have a shot at turning this mess around. Easier said than done, Leela pointed out, though her tone held a spark of optimism. It's like trying to have a heart-to-heart with a thunderstorm. Hey, storms pass, Jax said with a lopsided grin. Maybe we just need to weather it. With the brain buffer offering a fragile shield against the empathic onslaught, they set to work. Hours bled into one another as they pored over the data, each member of their ragtag band driven by a fierce desire to outwit their unseen foes. Aaron felt a surge of camaraderie amidst the chaos. They were misfits, sure, but they were his misfits. And together, they just might have a chance. Any luck with the entity? Aaron asked, peering over Leela's shoulder as she tapped out yet another message in Morse code. I think it's starting to respond more coherently, Leela said, her brow furrowed in concentration. It's still cryptic as hell, but there's a logic to it now. Cryptic logic, my favorite kind, Aaron quipped, though the glimmer of hope in Leela's eyes buoyed him. The lights flickered overhead, a reminder of the precariousness of their situation. But amidst the shadows, there was a grim determination, a refusal to go quietly into the void. Got something, Leela exclaimed, pointing to a series of symbols that had appeared on her screen. What's it saying? Jax asked, leaning in with interest. It's asking for help, Leela said, disbelief tinging her voice. It wants us to sever the connection to the Zarians. Help, Aaron echoed, his mind racing. You think it's genuine? Leela nodded, her expression serious. I think it's as trapped as we are. Well, isn't that a cosmic kick in the teeth? Alara said, her voice dry as Martian dust. An ancient entity needs us to bail it out. Who saw that coming? We've got our work cut out for us, Aaron said, the enormity of their task settling over him like a lead weight. But at least we know we're not alone in this. Nope, Jax said, a steely glint in his eye. We've got each other, a piss-poor plan, and a toaster that might as well be our secret weapon. And a universe full of things trying to kill us, Leela added, her smile a defiant curve. Just another day on Mars, Aaron said, unable to suppress a chuckle. The team dug in, fueled by a newfound resolve. They would find a way to help the entity, to sever the Zarians' hold and reclaim their agency. They weren't heroes, but they were human, and if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was surviving against the odds. As the hours stretched on, they pieced together a plan, a risky, harebrained scheme involving Jax's cobbled-together tech and Leela's linguistic prowess. It was the kind of plan that had a snowball's chance in hell, but it was all they had. Ready to do something stupid? Aaron asked, glancing around at his comrades. Born ready, Jax replied, flashing a grin that was equal parts madness and courage. Let's give these Zarian bastards a run for their money, Leela said, her voice a battle cry. Aaron nodded, a fierce pride swelling in his chest. All right, folks, let's show the universe what we're made of. They worked tirelessly, the room a hive of frenetic energy and whispered calculations. As they prepared to launch their makeshift countermeasure, Aaron felt a strange sense of calm. They were on the precipice of disaster, sure, but they were facing it together. Here goes nothing, Jax said, initiating the sequence with a flourish. The device hummed to life, a beacon of human ingenuity and desperation pulsing with every heartbeat. Aaron held his breath, waiting for the inevitable backlash. And then it hit, a surge of energy that crackled through the air, making the very walls tremble. But instead of chaos, there was clarity. The empathic waves subsided, replaced by a tenuous calm that settled over them like a blessing. We did it, Leela breathed, her voice awash with awe. Damn right we did, Aaron replied, a grin splitting his face. We've severed the connection. Take that, you Zarian bastards, Jax crowed, punching the air triumphantly. Alara chuckled, the sound rich with relief. Guess we're not done just yet. As the dust settled, Aaron looked around at his friends, his comrades, and felt a surge of gratitude. They'd faced down the darkness and emerged with a sliver of hope. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he believed they might just win this fight. The brain buffer hummed like a pissed-off bee, but at least it was working. For now, Aaron stared at the screen as the alien symbols danced across it, taunting him like a crossword puzzle from hell. He'd never been much good at puzzles, and this one was proving to be a real bastard. Jax was fiddling with the toaster-looking device again, his face a mask of concentration. The man looked like he was trying to defuse a bomb using only a toothpick and wishful thinking. You know, if this thing blows, I'm blaming you, Jax said, not looking up. Blame me if it doesn't, too, Aaron replied. Either way, I'm taking the credit. Leela snorted, her eyes bleary from staring at the data. You know, I always imagined my career in xenolinguistics would be more glamorous. Maybe a little less end of the world. Welcome to Mars, Alara said dryly, her gaze never leaving the scrambled patterns on her own console. Where dreams come to die and we all wish we were somewhere else. Or someone else, Aaron muttered. Preferably someone on a beach with a drink. But there were no beaches on Mars. Just red wastelands and an ever-present threat that made the idea of a suntan feel like pure fantasy. Aaron rubbed his temples, feeling the pressure of the empathic waves like a vice around his skull. The brain buffer kept the worst at bay, but it was like trying to stop a flood with a paper towel. Anything from the entity? Jax asked, glancing over at Leela. Nothing coherent, she replied, sounding frustrated. It's like trying to talk to a drunk parrot. It squawks but makes no damn sense. Maybe it's just shy, Aaron suggested, earning him a glare from Leela. Or maybe it doesn't trust us, Alara said, her voice laced with grim resignation. Can't say I blame it. We're not exactly the best of neighbors. No, we're more like that annoying family next door with the barking dog and loud music, Jax added, tweaking a wire that made the brain buffer emit a whining sound, which promptly stopped. Aaron sighed. Their attempt to communicate with the entity felt like trying to shout across a hurricane. It was there, somewhere in the storm, but every attempt he made to reach out felt like flailing in the dark. Meanwhile, the Zarians were tightening their grip, like a boa constrictor slowly suffocating its prey. The empathic surges were their weapon of choice, turning the colony into a melting pot of paranoia and fear. Morale was crumbling faster than a Martian sandcastle. Tensions were high, and everyone was looking over their shoulders, convinced that their neighbors were out to get them. Aaron couldn't blame them. He'd seen it happen before. Stress and fear brought out the worst in people. And right now, they were swimming in both. How's the morale? Aaron asked, though he already knew the answer. About as high as a snail's arse, Alara replied, crossing her arms. People are starting to lose it. More fights breaking out, more accusations. It's like a soap opera, but with more swearing and less attractive people. And we've got front row seats, Jax added, chuckling mirthlessly. The Zarians' strategy was depressingly effective. They didn't need to send an army. They just needed to keep them off balance, let them tear themselves apart. It was like watching a horror movie in slow motion, except they were the unlucky protagonists. We need to get a handle on this, Aaron said, frustration lacing his voice. If we don't, we'll implode, and the Zarians won't even have to lift a finger. Got any bright ideas? Leela asked, shooting him a dubious look. Aaron shook his head. Ideas were the one thing he was running short of. Besides, every time he thought he had a plan, the Zarians were 2 steps ahead, like they had an insider feeding them his thoughts. We keep trying, he said finally, though it sounded feeble even to his own ears. We keep working on the entity. It's our best bet. Jax frowned, and for once, his usually irreverent expression turned serious. You really think we can reach it? I do, Aaron said, though the voice inside his head told him he was a damn fool. We just have to show it we're not the enemy. Yeah, because that's easy, Alara muttered. Maybe we should send it flowers and an apology card. Can it hurt? Aaron shrugged, looking back at his screen. We've got nothing but time and desperation. That's the spirit, Jax said with a wry grin, but his eyes didn't quite match the smile. They all knew what was at stake, and the weight of it pressed down on them like lead. Aaron returned to his work, focusing on the patterns and trying to make sense of the entity's cryptic messages. He was no xenolinguist, but if he could just crack the code, maybe they had a chance. Hours passed in a blur of frustration and small victories. The brain buffer continued its strained work, each surge of energy a reminder that their time was limited. The device was a temporary measure at best, a band-aid on a gaping wound. Jax was muttering to himself, adjusting the settings on his makeshift contraption, while Leela typed furiously, her fingers a blur over the keyboard. Then the lights dimmed, flickering ominously. Aaron's heart skipped a beat. What the hell? Jax looked up, his face etched with worry. Looks like the Zarians are stepping up their game. They're targeting our power. Great, Leela said, throwing her hands up. And here I thought today couldn't get any worse. We need to stabilize the power, Aaron said, trying to keep the panic from his voice. If the brain buffer goes down, we're screwed. On it, Jax replied, already moving across the room like a man with a mission. Though I'm not making any promises. As Jax worked his magic, or whatever passed for it, Aaron turned to Lara. How are the colonists holding up? Not well, she admitted, running a hand through her hair. Paranoia's spreading like wildfire. Everyone's looking for someone to blame. Any chance you could give them a pep talk? Aaron asked, though he knew it was a long shot. Alara snorted, a bitter smile on her lips. Sure. I'll tell them to cheer up because things always get better before they get worse. Optimistic as ever, Aaron said, though he appreciated her bluntness. It was comforting in a world gone mad. You know me, Alara replied. Always the life of the party. The lights flickered again, and Aaron's stomach twisted. If they lost power, they'd be back to square one, the empathic waves crashing over them like a tidal wave. How's it going, Jax? Aaron called out, hoping for some good news. Depends on your definition of good, Jax replied, fiddling with a particularly stubborn wire. I think I can keep us going for a bit longer, but it's a patch job. Don't get too comfortable. Wouldn't dream of it, Aaron muttered, his eyes fixed on the screen. He had a feeling comfort was something they wouldn't be seeing for a while. Leela let out a frustrated sigh, tapping her pen against the desk. We're running out of time. If we don't get through to the entity soon, we're done. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. They all knew she was right. The Zarians' plan was working like a charm, and every second that ticked by brought them closer to the brink. Aaron clenched his fists, determination hardening his resolve. He wouldn't let the Zarians win. Not without a fight. Not while there was still a chance, however slim. We keep going, he said, his voice firm. We keep trying until we can't try anymore. And then, Alara asked, raising an eyebrow. Then we improvise, Aaron replied with a grim smile. And hope like hell it works. Sounds like a plan, Jax said, giving him a thumbs up. A terrible plan, but a plan nonetheless. Aaron chuckled, though it was devoid of humor. In a world gone mad, a ragtag team of misfits might be their best hope. And if nothing else, they'd go down swinging. But as the hours dragged on, exhaustion began to take its toll. Each attempt to reach the entity felt like screaming into the void, and Aaron's frustration mounted with every failure. He slumped back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. We're missing something, he said, his voice weary. Leela glanced over, her expression sympathetic. Yeah, a miracle. We've come this far, Jax said, his tone stubborn. We can't give up now. Aaron nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The Zarians were relentless, their grip tightening with every passing hour. They had to find a way to break through the noise, to reach the entity and forge an alliance. It was their only hope, their last, desperate gamble. We'll figure it out, Aaron said, though it felt more like a plea than a promise. One way or another, Alara agreed, though her voice held a hint of doubt. They returned to their work, the room filled with the hum of machines and the soft clatter of keyboards. The brain buffer whirred tirelessly, its efforts a fragile barrier against the chaos that threatened to consume them. And as the lights flickered yet again, Aaron couldn't help but wonder if they'd have the strength to see this fight through to the end. Dr. Aaron Solus sat hunched over his console, the flickering lights casting ominous shadows on the walls. He rubbed his temples, trying to ignore the empathic waves that pounded against his mind like a relentless sea. It was just another day on Mars, a place where dreams and sanity came to die. Any luck? Jax Thorne asked, sauntering over with the confidence of a man who'd never met a machine he couldn't break and then sort of fix again. Define luck, Aaron replied, his voice edged with frustration. If you have to ask, you don't have it, Jax quipped, leaning against a workstation. His face was a study in casual disregard, as if he hadn't just committed another affront to safety protocol. You look like you could use a drink. Or a new job. Or a lobotomy, Aaron muttered under his breath, eyes scanning the unintelligible data on his screen. The Zarians were playing them like a cheap fiddle, and Aaron could feel the strings pulling tighter around his throat. You hear that? Leela Nick said from across the room, her voice cutting through the dim atmosphere like a knife. It's the sound of my career dying. Join the club, Aaron said, glancing at her. The xenolinguist had a knack for sarcasm, and he appreciated it, even if it was like appreciating the aesthetics of a train wreck. Leela's fingers danced over her keyboard with the grace of a ballet dancer neck deep in quicksand. I think I found something, she announced, a spark of triumph in her eyes. Or maybe I'm just hallucinating from lack of sleep. Either way, it's new, Jax said, wandering over to peer at her screen. Anything beats looking at Aaron's face. Thanks for the support, Aaron said, though he had a feeling Jax's version of support was akin to a kick in the shins. Leela turned her monitor to them. Look, I've isolated a pattern in the entity's signals. It's like Morse code on steroids. Does it come with a user manual? Aaron asked, leaning in. His heart lifted, a small, fragile thing in a world determined to crush it. Not exactly, Leela replied, typing furiously. But it might be a way to reverse the empathy weapon. If we can sync our brain buffer with the entity's consciousness, we might be able to send the empathic waves back at the Zarians. Let me guess. Alara Voss chimed in from her corner. There's a catch. There's always a catch, Leela admitted, her voice tinged with skepticism. We need to get the entity's cooperation. And considering it communicates like a drunken toddler, that's easier said than done. Aaron's heart sank faster than a lead balloon. So, we're back to square one? Not quite, Leela said, her fingers tapping a rhythm on her desk. We just need to convince an alien entity to trust us. It's not like we have a history of blowing things up or anything. Optimism, Jax said with a mock salute. It's what gets you killed. Or keeps you alive, Aaron countered, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. The room fell into a tense silence, each of them lost in their thoughts. The task ahead was monumental, and the only thing they had in abundance was doubt. Let's say we manage to get through to this entity, Alara said, skepticism coating her words like oil on water. What's to stop the Zarians from just blowing us out of existence once they catch wind? Good question, Aaron said, trying not to dwell on the thought. Hopefully, they'll be too busy dealing with their own empathic headaches. Assuming we can pull it off, Leela added, her voice barely a whisper now. It's a long shot. In our line of work, long shots are the only shots, Jax said, his tone light but his eyes serious. Aaron nodded, feeling the weight of their task settle on his shoulders like a mantle of despair. We need to take this chance. It's better than waiting for the Zarians to seal our fate. Spoken like a man with nothing left to lose, Alara said, a ghost of a smile on her lips. And even less to gain, Aaron muttered, but he straightened his back, forcing himself to focus. Let's start by refining the brain buffer. Jax, you think you can give it a boost? Sure, Jax said, rolling up his sleeves. I'll just wave my magic wand and hope it doesn't explode. That's the spirit, Leela said, pulling her chair closer to Jax's workstation. If it does, at least we'll go out with a bang. Or a whimper, Aaron corrected. But who's keeping track? They fell into a rhythm, each lost in their tasks. The room was filled with the sound of clicking keys and muttered curses, their desperation a palpable presence in the air. Hours slipped by in a haze of determination and fear. The brain buffer hummed steadily, a beacon of hope in a sea of doubt. Or maybe just a temporary reprieve from the inevitable crash. Aaron's mind wandered back to the past, to the moment that had set him on this path. The first time he'd encountered empathic waves, back when he thought he could control them. Before the Zarians proved him wrong. He shook his head, banishing the memories. He couldn't afford to be haunted by ghosts now. Not when the present was filled with specters of its own. Hey, Aaron, Jax said, breaking the silence. You okay? Yeah, just thinking, Aaron replied, though the shadows in his eyes spoke of memories better left buried. About how screwed we are? Jax asked, managing a crooked grin. Something like that, Aaron said, forcing a smile. But at least we'll be heroes. Or at the very least, we'll get a footnote in the history books. Famous last words, Alara said, but her tone was lighter, the edge of cynicism softened by the camaraderie they shared. Leela cleared her throat, drawing their attention back to her screen. I've managed to isolate the frequency we need. Now we just need to pray the entity is in a listening mood. Should we send a fruit basket? Jax joked, though his hands were steady as he adjusted the settings on the brain buffer. Or a peace offering, Aaron said, running a hand through his hair. Hopefully, our intentions come through loud and clear. Not that they ever do, Alara said, her voice a dry whisper. We'll make it work, Aaron said, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince. They worked in silence, the weight of their task hanging over them like a storm cloud. The brain buffer whirred, its low hum a constant reminder of the fragile barrier between them and destruction. As the hours dragged on, exhaustion seeped into their bones, turning fingers to lead and thoughts to syrup. Yet they soldiered on, driven by the flicker of hope that refused to be extinguished. Finally, Leela straightened, her eyes bloodshot but determined. I think we're ready. Define ready, Aaron said, echoing Jax's earlier words. Ready to try, Leela corrected, her voice a mixture of hope and resignation. Good enough for me, Jax said, standing back and wiping his hands on a rag. Let's give the Zarians a taste of their own medicine. Aaron nodded, steeling himself for what was to come. Let's save the colony, he said, though the words felt hollow, as if daring fate to take them at face value. They gathered around the digital altar, each one a witness to their own brand of madness. The brain buffer pulsed with restrained energy, a testament to their ingenuity and desperation. Here goes nothing, Aaron said, pressing the final sequence of commands. The room held its collective breath as the brain buffer shuddered, a soft whine escaping its depths. The monitors flashed, data streaming faster than their eyes could follow. And then, silence. For a moment, Aaron's heart stopped, caught between hope and dread. Had they succeeded, or were they about to be swept away by the empathic tide? He glanced at his teammates, their faces mirrors of his own uncertainty. Jax, ever the optimist, held a steady gaze, while Leela's hands shook slightly, betraying her nerves. Alara looked on with a mix of skepticism and determination, embodying the defiance that kept them all afloat. The brain buffer emitted a soft chime, and the monitors steadied, displaying a constant stream of data. Aaron felt the pressure in his mind ease, like a switch had been flipped, damping the empathic waves into a manageable hum. "Did it work?" Jax asked, his voice breaking the silence. "I think so," Leela said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're still standing, aren't we?" "Depends on your definition of standing," Alara quipped, though her eyes shone with something akin to relief. Aaron let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They'd done it, or at least, they'd taken the first step in a marathon of uncertainty. "Don't get too comfortable," Leela warned, her tone a reminder of the precariousness of their situation. "We've only just begun." "Then let's make it count," Aaron said, determination hardening his voice. "What's next?" Jax asked, a glint of excitement in his eyes. "We need to keep the connection stable," Leela said, focusing on her screen. "Maintain the feedback loop and hope the entity doesn't decide to bail." "A lot of hoping going on today," Alara remarked, crossing her arms. "It's what we do best," Aaron said, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle back onto his shoulders. They fell into a rhythm once more, the room echoing with the sound of their shared resolve. Each keystroke, every adjustment, a testament to their refusal to be beaten. As the minutes ticked by, Aaron felt a sense of calm wash over him, the chaos of the past few days momentarily subdued. It wouldn't last. Peace never did in this corner of the universe, but for now, it was enough. Enough to remind him why they fought, why they endured. Enough to keep trying, and in a world where the odds were stacked against them, that was a victory in itself. "Here's to the next step," Jax said, raising an imaginary glass. "And not falling flat on our faces," Alara added, a ghost of a smile tugging at her lips. "We'll get there," Leela said, her voice steady. Aaron nodded, a smile breaking through the fatigue. One step at a time. And together, they turned to face the unknown, ready to meet it head-on. Dr. Aaron Solus stood in the middle of the makeshift lab on Mars, surrounded by the familiar hum of malfunction and the comforting scent of burnt circuitry. It was as if the universe had given him a warm, electric blanket of chaos to wrap himself in. He took a moment to savor the feeling before reminding himself that he wasn't here for the ambience. "All right, listen up," Aaron said, louder than necessary to drown out the persistent groan of the brain buffer. "We've got a situation more delicate than a politician's ego. We need to convince this Martian entity to join our little anti-Zarian campaign. And by convince, I mean grovel like our lives depend on it." Jenkins, everyone's least favorite technician, poked his head up from behind a stack of blinking panels, his expression as charisma-free as ever. "Does that mean I get to use my charm?" he asked, his tone as dry as Martian sand. "If by charm you mean stay out of sight, then absolutely," Aaron replied, not missing a beat. Dr. Alara Voss, the resident cynic who treated optimism like a communicable disease, leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "And if this thing decides it's had enough of our pathetic attempts at diplomacy? Then we'll have front row seats to our own annihilation," Aaron said, shrugging. "At least we won't have to worry about paying off student loans." "Silver linings," Jax Thorne chimed in, his hands busy coaxing life into a toaster-like device that seemed more interested in spontaneous combustion than cooperation. "Nice to know you're still aiming high, Aaron." "Call it a defense mechanism," Aaron shot back, adjusting the settings on the brain buffer with a surgeon's precision. "Or a side effect of too much time on this godforsaken rock." Leela Nix, their resident xenolinguist, looked up from her screen, her eyes filled with the kind of skepticism reserved for used car salesmen and interstellar treaties. "The alien entity's signals are still erratic, like a drunk trying to play piano." "Great," Aaron said, rubbing his temples. "We're relying on an entity with the attention span of a goldfish under duress." "It's a step up from what we usually work with," Jax quipped, giving a piece of machinery a solid thump for good measure. Aaron gazed around at his motley crew, a bunch of misfits and survivors bound by necessity more than trust. Yet, they were his misfits, and damn if they weren't going to give this everything they had. Even if that everything was slightly less impressive than a well-organized circus. "Here's the deal," Aaron said, rallying him, "we lean into what makes us human. Our stubbornness, our knack for not dying when we should, and our ability to annoy the hell out of anything within earshot." "Good to know my career in nuisance is paying off," Jenkins mumbled. "Think of it as job security," Aaron advised, turning to the console that had become both his ally and adversary. "All right, people, let's see if we can't make a decent impression. Or at least not blow ourselves up in the process." The room buzzed with a reluctant energy as they sprang into action, each with their role to play in this absurd drama. Jax's fingers darted over switches and dials, a maestro conducting an orchestra of broken dreams. Leela muttered to herself in half-formed alien languages, her screen displaying lines of text that might as well have been hieroglyphs to everyone else. Jenkins shuffled around, doing his best impersonation of a functioning member of the team, which was impressive considering his baseline was living caution tape. "So, Aaron," Alara called over the din, "what's the plan if this turns into a cosmic game of Russian roulette?" "Simple," Aaron replied, feigning a nonchalance he didn't feel. "We duck and cover, preferably behind something large and preferably not each other." "That's comforting," she deadpanned, tapping at her console with the kind of determination that comes only from a complete lack of alternatives. "Here's hoping our alien friend appreciates sarcasm. Or at least understands it," Leela added, her fingers flying across her keyboard as if the correct combination of keystrokes might open a portal to salvation. Or at least a universe where coffee wasn't an overpriced rarity. As the team synchronized their efforts, a subtle shift in the atmosphere hinted at something significant, or catastrophic, but Aaron preferred to hedge his bets towards the former. "All right," Leela breathed, her voice threadbare and hopeful. "I think we're close." Aaron felt his pulse quicken, anticipation blending with dread. If this worked, they might just stand a chance against the Zarians. If it didn't, well, they'd have a short wait to see if there was an afterlife worth writing home about. "Let's make it count," he said, his voice carrying the weight of both command and plea. They initiated the sequence, the room darkening as power redirected to their makeshift beacon of defiance. The brain buffer whirred with intensity, casting an eerie glow that painted their faces in shades of desperation and hope. As the moment stretched into an eternity, a soft chime broke the silence, and data began to stream in, a language of light and sound only Leela seemed to decipher, her eyes widening in recognition. "We've got contact," she exclaimed, disbelief tinged with triumph. Before they could celebrate, the room's atmosphere shifted again, this time with the ominous weight of betrayal. An alarm blared, lights flashing red like an interstellar wine tasting gone horribly wrong. "What now?" Jax groaned, his optimism taking a nosedive. Aaron's eyes scanned the room, his instincts screaming that something was off. The feeling was validated when Jenkins, looking more shifty than usual, started edging towards the door. "Jenkins," Aaron said, his voice colder than a Martian night, "care to explain the sudden urge for a bathroom break?" Jenkins froze, guilt flickering across his face like a poorly coded hologram. Just thought I'd stretch my legs." "You don't stretch anything," Alara pointed out, her gaze sharp enough to cut through misconceptions, and perhaps an errand technician. All right, Jenkins stammered, hands raised in mock surrender. "I might have, sort of, accidentally, on purpose, informed the Zarians about our little project." The admission hung in the air like a bad smell, disbelief crashing over them like a cold wave. Aaron's mind raced, trying to process the betrayal while suppressing the urge to throttle Jenkins where he stood. "You've got to be kidding me," Jax said, his voice a blend of incredulity and annoyance. "You sold us out." "It's not like that," Jenkins protested weakly. "They made an offer I couldn't refuse." "What, a lifetime supply of self-loathing?" Leela snapped, her patience as thin as the air outside the dome. "Let's not kill him, yet," Alara suggested, though her tone left room for negotiation. "We might need a scapegoat. Or a distraction," Aaron added, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "Jenkins, you're going to fix this. You're going to help us patch this mess and keep the Zarians off our backs." "And why would I do that?" Jenkins asked, his bravado wavering. "Because if you don't," Aaron said, his voice dark with promise, "I'll let Alara play the blame game with your organs." Fine, Jenkins relented, his fear outweighing his greed, or stupidity, by a narrow margin. "I'll help." With Jenkins back under watchful eyes, they returned to the task at hand, their progress now impeded by the knowledge that they were working against a clock set to detonate. "Let's get this done before the Zarians crash the party," Aaron said, trying to inject some urgency into their steps. "We've got a Martian entity to make friends with and a galaxy to save." "No pressure," Jax grinned, though it was tinged with the tension of knowing just how high the stakes were. "We thrive under pressure," Aaron replied, rallying his team with the kind of forced optimism that bordered on delusion. As they worked, Jenkins was pressed into service, his every move monitored with suspicion. Each keystroke, every adjustment, was a reminder of the precariousness of their situation, and the thin line between ally and adversary. With the brain buffer stable and the entity's signals more focused, they prepared for the final step, initiating a feedback loop designed to amplify the empathic waves and send them careening back at the Zarians. "Ready?" Aaron asked, his gaze sweeping over his team, each one a mix of determination and trepidation. As we'll ever be, Leela replied, her voice steady despite the storm of uncertainty around them. Let's do this, Aaron said, feeling the gravity of their mission coalesce into a singular moment. They synchronized their efforts, a symphony of intent and desperation. The brain buffer pulsed with energy, their combined willpower channeled through circuitry and hope. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, a ripple of sensation spread through the room, a tangible shift in the air that signaled success, or cataclysm, but Aaron wasn't picky at this point. We did it, Jax breathed, wonder laced with relief. Don't pop the champagne just yet, Alara cautioned, her eyes on the monitors. We've still got a Zarian-sized problem to deal with. But we've got a fighting chance, Aaron said, feeling the weight of triumph settle alongside the ever-present dread. And sometimes, that's all you need. They shared a moment of camaraderie, a fragile bond forged in the fires of adversity and necessity. The future was uncertain, the path ahead treacherous, but for now, they were together, united in purpose and defiance. Here's to tomorrow, Leela said, raising an imaginary toast. And kicking Zarian ass, Jax added, with the kind of reckless enthusiasm that was both inspiring and mildly terrifying. Aaron smiled, a rare moment of levity cutting through the gloom. One step at a time, he said, echoing his earlier sentiment. And as they turned back to their work, the specter of betrayal still lurking in the shadows, they knew that whatever the odds, they would face them head-on, cynical, irreverent, and unyielding. Because in the end, that's what it meant to be human. Jenkins was sweating bullets, and not the fancy kind. More like the rusty, tetanus-infested ones you'd find in a scrapyard. Mars wasn't kind to its inhabitants, and today was no exception. The room was a flurry of activity, buttons clicking, screens flashing, like the world's least impressive light show. All right, Jenkins, said Aaron, his voice as sharp as a laser scalpel. Time to dig yourself out of this hole you dug for us. And while you're at it, make sure it's not your grave. The hum of the brain buffer grew louder, an ominous reminder that they were playing with forces not meant for human hands. Sure thing, boss, Jenkins muttered, trying to blend into the background like a chameleon with a self-esteem issue. If he could have melted into the floor, he would have, but Mars wasn't that merciful. Leela was over at her station, fingers dancing over the keyboard. I still can't believe we entrusted our fate to a man whose biggest achievement is losing his own shadow, she said, not bothering to hide her disdain. Hey, in my defense, Jenkins replied, my shadow's been very elusive. I swear it's got a vendetta. Maybe it just doesn't want to be associated with you, quipped Jax, peering over the top of his toaster-like device. The thing looked ready to combust at any second, and quite frankly, no one wanted to be near it when it did. Newsflash, we're all in the same boat, and last I checked, it's taking on water. Speaking of boats, Alara chimed in, not looking up from her console. Anyone else feel like we're about to hit an iceberg? Except instead of icy doom, it's a Martian entity that could turn us into cosmic confetti. Jenkins wiped his brow, hands jittering on the controls. If it makes you feel any better, I'm pretty sure I'm more afraid of Alara than the entity. Flattery will get you nowhere, Jenkins, Alara said with a smirk, but it's a start. Less talk, more fixing, Aaron reminded them, focusing intently on his screen. Every second counted, and each one was a tick closer to either salvation or disaster. He couldn't decide which seemed more likely but was leaning heavily towards the latter given their streak. Suddenly, the brain buffer emitted a sound that could only be described as a dying cow's last moo, a sure sign something was happening. Good, bad, or indifferent, it was a step toward something. Brace yourselves, Leela shouted, eyes glued to her terminal. We're getting a response. I think the entity's starting to listen. Or it's deciding which limb to eat first, Jax suggested, rubbing his hands together like a mad scientist. But hey, at least it'll get Jenkins first. The console lights flickered ominously. Aaron's gut told him things were about to go pear-shaped, but there wasn't time to dwell on it. Action was the order of the day, and if they were going to go down, they'd do it kicking and screaming, preferably as loudly and annoyingly as possible. Okay team, this is it, Aaron said, taking a deep breath that did little to calm his nerves. We need to sync up, push this feedback loop to its limits, and hope to whatever deity is listening that it's enough to shatter the Zarian's hold. And if it's not, Jenkins asked, like someone who'd accepted his fate as being less than favorable. Then I hope you like being a Zarian puppet. Because that's all we'll be, Leela replied, her serious tone belying the absurdity of their predicament. But no pressure, right? Exactly, Aaron nodded, his eyes hardening with determination. This is going to work because failure's not an option. Mostly because there's no one left to pick up the pieces if it does. Jax, ever the optimist, grinned. Just think of it as life, but with higher stakes and fewer bathroom breaks. Somehow that's not comforting, Jenkins muttered, but his hands moved with newfound purpose, fear giving way to a grim resolve. They worked with a synchronicity born of necessity, each person a cog in a machine that had no business functioning, yet somehow did. Aaron monitored the brain buffer, its fluctuating groan as unpredictable as Jenkins' excuses. Hold steady, Aaron said as the room pulsed with the eerie, tangible weight of empathic waves. It was like being in the eye of a storm, calm and chaos living as uncomfortable roommates. Leela's eyes darted over the stream of alien symbols, her brain working overtime to decipher and redirect them. We're almost there. Keep it together, people. Jenkins' fingers danced across the controls, his expression a mix of concentration and terror, like a man trying to defuse a bomb while blindfolded and slightly drunk. I think I got it, he said, his voice quivering with hope or perhaps fear, but in this context, they were one and the same. The room's atmosphere shifted, a gut-wrenching lurch that felt like a ship being tossed on turbulent seas. The brain buffer's groan reached a crescendo, then abruptly cut off, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. Did it work? Jax asked, breaking the tension with his characteristic bluntness. For a heart-stopping moment, no one dared to breathe. Then, the console screens flickered back to life, displaying a string of symbols that had haunted them since the beginning, but now, there was something different about them, a sense of calm, of understanding. We did it, Leela whispered, all mingling with disbelief. The entity, it's free. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. They'd done the impossible, not through sheer luck, but through grit, determination, and a stubborn refusal to lie down and die. See, Jenkins, we didn't even have to use you as bait, Alara said with a smirk, though her eyes shone with relief. Yet, Aaron added with a wry grin, the tension that had coiled in his gut for so long slowly unwinding, though there was still work to be done, and victory was far from assured. All right, folks, Aaron said, his voice steady and commanding, the weight of leadership settling comfortably on his shoulders once more. Let's not get too comfortable. We've won a battle, not the war. Typical, Jax groaned, though his eyes twinkled with mischief. Can't even enjoy the moment without worrying about the next crisis. That's what keeps us alive, Leela retorted, her demeanor more relaxed than it had been in weeks. Besides, what else is there to do on Mars? Watch the dust settle? We could start a band, Jenkins suggested, only half joking, the absurdity of the notion of welcome relief from the tension. I hear the acoustic scene on Mars is really picking up. Funny, Aaron said, his gaze sweeping the room, catching each team member's eye. How about we save the musical act for after we've kicked the Zarians to the curb? With a shared nod of agreement, they turned their attention back to the task at hand. For now, they had a reprieve, a moment to breathe in the aftermath of chaos. But beyond the walls of their makeshift lab, the universe was still a dangerous place, and the Zarians wouldn't take this defeat lying down. Here's to hoping they like the taste of their own medicine, Alara said, her voice laced with a satisfaction born of hard-won victory. And if they don't? Jenkins asked, his expression a mixture of hope and skepticism. Then we just keep shoving it down their throats until they do, Aaron replied, his voice a blend of optimism and ruthless determination. That's what humans do best, isn't it? They all shared a laugh, the sound more genuine than it had been in a long time. In that moment, the weight of their struggles lifted, if only for a brief respite. They were far from safe, far from victory, but they were together, and that was a victory in itself. With renewed energy, they returned to their work, aware that their lives, and possibly the fate of the galaxy, hung in the balance. It was a daunting prospect, but as Aaron had said, they were too stubborn to die and too annoying to give up. Mars might be the graveyard of dreams, but for this ragtag group of survivors, it was also the birthplace of hope. And as they moved forward, determined to fight back against the Zarians and reclaim their futures, they knew one thing for certain, they wouldn't go quietly into the night. All right, Aaron said, clapping his hands together. Let's get back to it. We've got a galaxy to save, and I'd like to do it before breakfast. Yeah, Jax replied with a grin, because nothing says, human spirit, like saving the universe on an empty stomach. And with that, they dove back into the chaos, shoulder to shoulder, ready to face whatever came next with sarcasm, determination, and the unyielding belief that they could do the impossible. After all, they were human, and that was their superpower. Well, I'll be damned, Jax said, standing up from the console like a man who's just realized he might not die a horrible death today. Looks like we're not gonna get vaporized after all. Guess I'll have to cancel that standing appointment with Oblivion. Don't get too comfortable, Aaron replied, his expression as inscrutable as a locked safe. We've still got to deal with the aftermath. Saving the day is just the opening act. Leela wiped a bead of sweat from her brow and leaned back in her chair, exuding the sort of casual exhaustion that only comes from narrowly avoiding cosmic catastrophe. It's official. I've had enough crisis for one solar day. If anyone needs me, I'll be in my bunk, pretending I'm on a planet that isn't trying to kill me. Can't say I blame you, Alara chimed in, crossing her arms. This whole mess has been like trying to herd cats through a minefield, except the cats are on fire and the mines are sentient. Sentient mines, Jenkins repeated, shaking his head with the kind of bemusement that suggested he'd come to grips with the insanity of their lives. Almost sounds preferable to dealing with the Zarians. Almost, Jax agreed, tapping a few final commands into the device that had somehow refrained from exploding. Hey, at least we've got a Martian entity on our side now. How's that for an ally? Ah yes, Aaron said dryly, because when I woke up this morning, I thought, you know what we really need? An inscrutable alien entity as our partner. Could be worse, Alara pointed out, casting a sidelong glance at Jenkins. We could be relying on Jenkins' shadow. The mention of his missing shadow had Jenkins brightening up, though that might have been the effect of the console finally stabilizing. Let's not get ahead of ourselves here. I'm still working on that one. The atmosphere in the room shifted once more, this time with the weight of relief rather than impending doom. They'd done it, they'd actually done it. The Martian entity, once an enigma wrapped in a death threat, was now something like an ally. Or at least, less murderously curious. Okay, Aaron said, pulling everyone's attention back to the matter at hand. We've got a colony to rebuild, and a few Zarian egos to deflate. Let's not waste time celebrating just yet. You sure know how to kill a mood, Solus, Jax smirked, though he was already moving back to his workstation, fingers ready to tap out fate-altering commands with all the enthusiasm of a man ordering another round. Just doing my job, Aaron replied. Besides, you should know by now I only celebrate when we're halfway to being heroes or villains. The line's pretty thin out here. Right, Leela said, her fingers flying over her keyboard, translating alien symbols like she was ordering takeout. Let's just hope we end up on the right side of that line. The Martian entity, now freed from the Zarians' insidious grasp, began communicating more directly. Not through Morse code, but through a series of harmonics that resonated with the brain buffer. It was like the universe's version of elevator music, and somehow, it felt welcoming. Jenkins peered at the console. What's it saying? Hard to tell, Leela admitted, though her eyes twinkled with newfound hope. But I think it's welcoming us. Either that or it's offering suggestions for our next meal. God, I hope it's not suggesting anything with tentacles, Jax quipped. I'm not sure I could stomach alien sushi. Alara rolled her eyes. Let's focus, people. We've got a colony to stabilize and an alien empire to piss off. That's the spirit, Aaron said, clapping his hands together like a coach rallying a team of misfit players. We've got enough to deal with without adding culinary nightmares to the list. As they worked, the atmosphere in the makeshift lab shifted from one of desperation to cautious optimism. The Martian entity's harmonics filled the air, creating a strange sense of camaraderie. It was like having an invisible friend who was also the most dangerous thing on the planet. Jax leaned back in his chair, surveying the room with a satisfied grin. You know, if we survive this, we should write a book. How to annoy an alien empire and make friends with a Martian entity. Probably a bestseller, or at least a cautionary tale, Alara said with a snort. Chapter 1, Don't try this at home. Or on Mars, Jenkins added, tapping away with renewed vigor. Especially not on Mars. Aaron couldn't help but smile. Despite everything, they were still here. Still fighting. Still making jokes in the face of overwhelming odds. It was ludicrous and reckless and so very human. And maybe, just maybe, that was their secret weapon. All right, he said, feeling the weight of leadership as something he could shoulder, not a burden to crush him. Let's get to work. We've got a settlement to rebuild, and I'd like to do it before the Martian entity changes its mind and decides we're more amusing as space dust. With a chorus of groans and grudging laughter, they dove back into the fray. The consoles hummed with life, the lights flickered with purpose, and the team moved with the kind of efficiency that only comes from surviving a shared trauma, or several. As they worked, the harmonics from the Martian entity changed subtly, almost like an alien version of encouragement. It was strange, but it was also comforting. Like knowing that the universe wasn't entirely indifferent to their struggles. Hey, Jenkins said, his voice tinged with wonder, maybe this is what it feels like to have the cosmos on your side. Or we're just too stubborn to know when to give up, Leela replied with a grin. But either way, I'll take it. As the hours passed, the team fell into a rhythm. Consoles beeped, the brain buffer hummed, and the Martian entity's harmonics provided an alien soundtrack to their efforts. They worked tirelessly, fueled by the knowledge that they'd achieved something monumental. They'd freed an entity, formed an alliance, and struck a blow against the Zarians. Now, they just had to hold the line. "Jenkins," Aaron called, drawing the man's attention away from the screen. "How's the colony's power grid looking?" "Better than expected," Jenkins replied, a hint of pride creeping into his voice. "We've rerouted enough energy to stabilize critical systems. If the entity keeps cooperating, we might actually have a fighting chance." "Good," Aaron said, nodding with approval. "Keep it up. We're not out of the woods yet, but we're making progress." "You know," Jack said, swiveling his chair around, "I never thought I'd say this, but Mars is starting to grow on me. Like a fungus, sure, but still. Careful," Alara warned, though her eyes sparkled with amusement. "Next thing you know, you'll be planting a flag and declaring yourself king of the Red Wasteland." "Well, someone's got to do it," Jax replied with a wink. "Might as well be me." The banter flowed easily now, no longer strained by the weight of impending doom. They were survivors, and that carried its own kind of strength. A determination born from adversity, like weeds growing through cracks in concrete. As the day wore on, the colony began to stabilize. Systems that had been on the brink of collapse were now humming with newfound vitality. The Martian entity, still an enigma, seemed content to let them work, perhaps curious to see what these stubborn humans would do next. Aaron glanced around the room, taking in the sight of his team hard at work. They'd been through hell and back, but they were still here. Still fighting. Still making jokes and throwing sarcastic barbs. It was ridiculous and reckless and so very human. "All right, team," Aaron said, his voice carrying the weight of command and the warmth of camaraderie. "Let's finish this. We've got a colony to rebuild and a future to secure." With renewed determination, they dove back into the task at hand. The consoles hummed, the lights flickered with purpose, and the team moved with the kind of efficiency that only comes from surviving a shared trauma, or several. They were rebuilding their home, one system at a time, and they weren't going to stop until the job was done. As they worked, the harmonics from the Martian entity shifted once more, their alien melody filling the room with a sense of purpose. It was strange, but it was also comforting, like knowing that they weren't alone in the universe, that they had allies, however bizarre. "Hey," Jenkins said, glancing up from his console, "do you think the entity knows it's become part of the team?" "Maybe," Leela replied with a grin. "Or maybe it just thinks we're a fascinating experiment. Either way," Aaron said, "we're in this together. And that's enough for me." The hours blurred into one another as they worked, their efforts a testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity. They were survivors, and that carried its own kind of power. A determination born from adversity, like weeds growing through cracks in concrete. As the day turned to night, the colony began to stabilize. Systems that had been on the brink of collapse were now humming with newfound vitality. The Martian entity, still an enigma, seemed content to let them work, perhaps curious to see what these stubborn humans would do next. Aaron glanced around the room, taking in the sight of his team hard at work. They'd been through hell and back, but they were still here. Still fighting. Still making jokes and throwing sarcastic barbs. It was ridiculous and reckless and so very human. "All right, team," Aaron said, his voice carrying the weight of command and the warmth of camaraderie. "Let's finish this. We've got a colony to rebuild and a future to secure." With renewed determination, they dove back into the task at hand. The consoles hummed, the lights flickered with purpose, and the team moved with the kind of efficiency that only comes from surviving a shared trauma, or several. They were rebuilding their home, one system at a time, and they weren't going to stop until the job was done. In the end, it wasn't about defeating the Zarians or mastering alien technology. It was about the people beside them, the bonds forged in the fires of adversity, and the unyielding belief that they could do the impossible. Mars might be the graveyard of dreams, but for this ragtag group of survivors, it was also the birthplace of hope. And as they moved forward, determined to fight back against the Zarians and reclaim their futures, they knew one thing for certain: they wouldn't go quietly into the night. They'd stand together, face whatever challenges lay ahead, and carve out a future worthy of the stars. "Here's to human stubbornness," Alara said, raising an imaginary glass in salute. "And to Martian allies," Jax added with a grin. "And to the team we've become," Aaron finished, looking around at the faces of his friends, his family. "We've got each other, and that's enough." It was a beginning, not an end. The first step on a journey that promised to be as wild and unpredictable as the cosmos itself. But they were ready to face whatever came next with sarcasm, determination, and the unyielding belief that they could do the impossible. After all, they were human, and that was their superpower.